Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Commissioners and participants, I'm now turning on the ability to start your video and audio.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I don't know that I've ever participated in one of these Zoom meetings that had as many people as we have today. And I think that's a reflection on the level of interest that this topic generates. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us. This is the Advisory Committee Roundtable on Organic Waste Recycling for Thursday, September 22nd of 2022. My name is Pedro Nava, and I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. I want to thank you all again for joining us today. I want to introduce other commissioners who are here with us on Zoom or who will be joining us shortly. We have Vice Chair Sean Varner, Commissioners, hi Sean, Dion Aroner, who I think will join us in a little bit, David Byer, Anthony Canella, Bill Emerson, Gil Garcetti, and Yana Sidley. We also have some legislative members, Tasha Borner Horvath, I think will be joining us, and Senator Jim Nielsen in just a little bit. We also have commission staff, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, project managers Crystal Beckham, Tristan Stein, and analysts Sherry McAllister and Ashley Hurley. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping, and this is something that we've all become accustomed to with Zoom. For the advisory committee participants and commissioners, your audio and video will be turned on throughout the duration of today's meeting. However, it will be helpful if you mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please use the raised hand feature in Zoom to let us know that you want to make a comment or address something another participant said, and then you'll be added to the line. We'll call up folks in the order that they appear in the raised hand lineup. This meeting is going to be a little different in that Crystal Beckham, the project manager, is actually going to be the conductor of this symphony. Crystal, I see how eager you are to accept that responsibility, but you've got it. We've also opened up the chat feature so you may share resources throughout the discussion, such as links to useful websites or documents. The chat will be visible to members of the public, though they will not be able to contribute. In the chat, we've also included links to today's agenda and a list of advisory committee participants. These can also be found on the commission's website. Members of the public will be muted during the roundtable. We will have a public comment session at the end. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during the public comment session. If you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. Now, there may be those who have joined us by phone. They may either dial #9 to raise their hand on Zoom or to send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov, indicating you want to address the commission. You must provide the phone number from which you have joined so our staff knows who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the duration of the hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording today's roundtable, and after it, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Now let's talk about the substance of today's roundtable. Today's advisory committee discussion follows a series of hearings we held over the past few months on organic waste diversion. During these hearings, commissioners discussed the challenges that various entities face with implementing SB 1383, which requires residents and businesses to separate food scraps, yard waste, and other organic materials from the rest of their garbage. Local officials from both rural and urban jurisdictions and representatives from grassroots organizations detailed the obstacles they face in diverting organic waste in accordance with the law. A representative from the California Food Bank Association testified about the challenges they encounter in executing the law's requirement for edible food recovery. Commissioners asked representatives from key state agencies charged with implementing SB 1383 important questions regarding those implementation resources, coordination, and costs. Now today, we've invited a group of waste management industry experts to discuss their experiences with implementing organic waste recycling law. I'd like to thank all of our meeting participants for sharing their time and their expertise with us. Now, there's no question, given the benefits of this recycling, that we all want this to succeed. And to do that, it's not enough to hope. Hope isn't a plan. So it's important to analyze how we're going to get this done. That is really a significant part of the Commission's investigation, in that the law may have lofty goals and objectives, but it's up to men and women in localities and in businesses all across this state to figure out how this is actually going to occur. And that's part of what we are going to rely upon from you as to your experiences, what you have encountered, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, so that we can craft a set of recommendations that move the ball forward. Before we begin our discussion, I'm going to ask Commissioners Beyer and Canella, who serve on our subcommittee on organic waste recycling, if they'd like to make any comments at this time. So Commissioners Beyer and Canella, if you have anything you want to say now, this is a good time. And of course, we'll hear from you during the course of the roundtable.
Thank you, Commissioner Nava and Chairman Nava. I only have 3 points. The first is that the Commission, by statute and by habit, writes reports. And those reports have value to the legislature and to the executive branch. We kicked off this study hearing from the Speaker of the State Assembly. So we already know a high degree of legislative interest. And we look forward in the next several months to writing a report that has a limited and focused number of recommendations. So if in your testimony or your comments, you could think about our task and be succinct and pointed in your recommendations for us to consider. Second, it will be really helpful if you could contextualize your comments either about your company or your sector so that we have a sense of scale. We heard testimony, for example, from rural counties who represent a very small fraction of the waste, but who have giant problems given the size of their counties and their resources. So context is going to be important. And the last is a personal request. I don't understand acronyms. I don't like them. And you should assume that we're not experts in your field and we won't understand acronyms. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Beyer. Senator and Commissioner Canella.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just I don't want to echo Mr. Beyer's comments, and I want to thank all the participants. This is a pretty complicated issue. I don't know if we spent this much time on it in the legislature when this bill was passed. So we've learned a lot, and I think the knowledge through all of this will be very helpful when it comes to recommendations by the Little Hoover Commission. So again, thanks for joining. I really look forward to the discussion.
I want to thank you both for those remarks. Now let me turn it over to Project Manager Crystal Beckham, who organized today's roundtable discussion. Crystal?
Thank you, Commissioner Nava. Before we turn to a general discussion on the challenges involved in implementing SB 1383, there's something I'd like to address. The industry professionals that are here today are vital to our health and safety. They and the people they represent are the very definition of essential workers. So I have been disturbed and disappointed to learn from multiple sources about fears of reprisal from speaking negatively about SB 1383 and the way it's being implemented. We don't expect everyone to be in perfect agreement about public policy issues, but Trust in government is foundational to healthy democracy. And I'm very distressed to hear from so many that this trust has been breached. I've asked Eugene Tsang to summarize these concerns. He's trusted by many and relatively, though not completely, insulated from reprisals. Eugene, I thank you for being willing to speak to these concerns publicly and turn the floor over to you. Please unmute yourself and begin when you are ready.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so actually over the last couple of weeks, many people, and this includes cities, government agencies, public-private haulers, public-private facilities, even from some participants themselves, they feel very threatened to be by the potential negative comments that they have on SB 1383 or on the way it's actually being implemented. And from my perspective, I know that some of the comments may be very negative, but at least for me, they're meant to be very constructive to make this system work. I wholly believe in the goals of this law and what it's trying to achieve. And for the commission members that aren't really technical, I want to give you one piece of information that will give you some context of how important this law is. Over the last 6 years, I've been working with NASA JPL, and they've been actually flying a plane over several 100,000 entities in California, identifying sources of methane emissions. And to everybody's surprise, landfills, solid waste landfills, and they turned out to be the single largest point source of methane in California, and potentially around the world. This is such a significant finding. It's being published internationally as we speak now, and I can give you the links to that, is that for the first time ever, the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Egypt of this year is going to have a separate section just on the impact of solid waste infrastructure on climate change. So the way we look at climate change is going to be dependent upon how we deal with landfills and with organics. And so the best way I can sum up the concerns is for the participants really to be able to speak freely. And the best comment I got over the last 2 weeks is good luck. Testifying before this commission is going to be like testifying against Putin while sitting in the Kremlin. So I'm going to leave it as that. And that is the level of fear people are actually feeling. At least from my standpoint, I'm old and cranky. So that's an advantage. So I'm going to be speaking the way I see it. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Had I known that ahead of time, we would have given you little maybe Halloween masks to wear and made you all anonymous. Let me turn this back to Crystal. Thank you, Eugene, for those introductory remarks. But I think it is important to keep in mind that we're not going to be able to achieve the goals of this legislation if there is a level of apprehension about being candid about what has the potential to get in the way. But I also understand that looking at the list of people we have here, many are private sector folks. And so you've got businesses and you've got people who rely on you to generate revenue and income so that you can write paychecks for folks. So let's just keep that in mind as we move ahead. And Crystal, I'm getting out of the way. Your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to recognize Vice Chairman Varner, followed by Commissioner Sidley, who have their hands up.
Thank you, Crystal, and Mr. Singh, thank you for your being candid here. I'm concerned about what you said, and I don't know if you're at liberty to tell us where you think those reprisals may be coming from. I think this is a really important discussion just locally where I am, and I deal a little bit with this jurisdictionally. There's a lot of challenges of understanding, who can implement this and who's in charge, especially with businesses that cross jurisdictional boundaries. And there's a lot of confusion. So I'm concerned about someone that would there's backlash out there from somebody or some entity for speaking honestly about this and trying to make it right. So if you're at liberty, I'd like to understand where some of these reprisals might be coming from or could be coming from.
So to answer your question, the primary fear, and I'm just going to kind of summarize this, is basically going to be coming from CARICYCLE, basically the agency that oversees the enforcement of carrying out this law, and they're able to assess penalties or approve or disapprove. And I guess the fear is they can pretty much make life miserable for the local jurisdiction or for the business, whatever it may be. So that's I mean, I can offline, give you much more details, but I think in a public setting, that's the summary of what I've been getting from at least half a dozen people within the last 3 days.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I saw Ron Cline's hand go up when you were asking your question, Mr. Vice Chair. Ron, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to say before we begin this, I'm a private business. We've been doing research and waste for 10 years, self-funded. And we have to be honest, this is a major problem in the state of California. Let's solve it. We have the technology. There's a lot of people involved here today that have different ideas. It's going to take all these different ideas to solve this problem. So collectively, I think if we're all honest with each other and forthright, let's apply some solutions and forget about reprisals. I've gone through that my whole life with different companies. So, bring it on. Let's just solve the problem. That's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Sidley?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I had to step away. I'm having a small plumbing problem at my home while I'm dealing with this. But I just want to say that I certainly hope that nobody feels any threat from this commission. I've been on the commission for 6 years, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for us to hear the truth. Difficult, easy, great legislation, not great, needs to be tweaked. So please, 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 feel free to share. And I'm saddened to hear of the report that Crystal has provided. I find that to be heartbreaking. We only get better through dialogue and discussion and a position where we're willing to discuss what we're facing. So I just wanted to add that to this discussion as we start, that I found that report to be very concerning. And I think that we as a whole group need to proceed and we need to address this law and make sure that it's implemented properly so we can all go forward. So thank you.
I agree. And Commissioner Sidley, I know you and I always don't agree, but our dialogue together has made me better. So I appreciate that comment. And I do think that it's really important to for people to feel like they can have an open dialogue, because this is something that we're trying to prove, and the commission supports open and honest discussions.
Thank you. So now I'd like to turn to a more general discussion of SB 1383 implementation challenges and recommendations that our participants have on how the state could mitigate those challenges. I believe the previous issue we just discussed is an implementation challenge. If you feel threatened by talking about implementation, it's a problem. But now I'd like to open the floor to a more general discussion. If there are any participants who would like to jump in and start sharing the challenges that they've experienced or their colleagues have, please raise your hand. Eugene?
Okay, I guess I'm just the fastest one on the button here. Okay, so to give you context, this perspective I'm going to be giving you is actually pretty global in scope. I serve as the advisor to the National Science Foundation, and I think everybody knows who the National Science Foundation is. They help develop the basic infrastructure, the science and technology infrastructure for the country. They felt it important enough to actually fund a project to look at the entire organics and solid waste management infrastructure in the United States. And it's being done by a NASA funded research center at Cal State Northridge. So I'm an advisor to that program. And from my perspective of having done international technology assessment for the last 35 years, and that's the perspective. One of the biggest challenges, and I'm going to state it right up front, the way SB 1383 is being implemented right now, we will never reach those goals. And I've said that as early as 5 years ago. I think that the goals are admirable, but I think there's lots and lots of things that can be done to improve it. I'll just give a couple and then let other people speak. One of the primary things is there's a regulatory and legislative policy bias towards source separated recyclables such as food. We focus so much on it. And as an example, if you collect source separated food waste, it doesn't matter how much contamination there is. You can process it, and that's an acceptable processing line that can be permitted. But if you're going to be processing mixed waste, and anybody can check the statistics, most of the organics that's left that we're dealing with, it's still going to landfill in the mixed waste stream. And every other country that's achieved their 75 or 80% disposal reduction goal focuses also on the mixed waste. We have a state policy, a state regulation that says, if you take mixed waste and you want to process it, you can only take it to a facility that achieves a 75% organics recovery rate. Well, facilities like that don't exist, especially with the way we measure that performance. And so if a facility can only achieve recovering 60% of what's in the mixed waste stream, well, you can't take it to that facility. That's the way our infrastructure is actually set up by the laws. This is a ridiculous law, and that actually hinders the achievement of the maximum diversion to landfill. So I'll stop at that and let somebody else have a chance to talk.
Commissioner Byer, do you have a question? Commissioner Byer, you're muted.
Sorry. I'm trying to reconcile the view that at a superficial level, you seem to support the goal of the law, but you fundamentally don't agree with the structure of the law, and you don't think that it can be implemented. So I'm trying to figure out which direction you're going in, because I have difficulty reconciling those 2 points of view.
Okay, my point is that the law needs to be changed to encourage and actually promote the processing of the mixed waste stream, and to utilize what internationally successful, what we call commercially proven technologies. It's really the integrated waste management approach, using everything that's available in terms of technology to reduce the amount of materials going to a landfill. For example, California has adopted the integrated waste management approach back in 1989 when AB 939 was passed. But we've been terrible at actually implementing that in real life. We don't have any conversion technology facilities at any scale in California. It's just so hard to permit, and it's actually discouraged. And when I refer to conversion technologies, I'm referring to a whole suite of technologies that basically deal with residuals from materials recovery facilities, of what we call black bin waste. And thermal processing is the international standard, and sometimes it's required by law for the waste stream to be thermally processed before it goes to landfill. That is not encouraged or in California, and that is one of the things that the National Science Foundation and even the United Nations in the most recent documents is promoting as a result of trying to focus on reducing the amount of methane as it affects climate change.
So it sounds like you think the whole law is foolish and ill-conceived and not based on fact. Is that a good summary?
Well, I know I wouldn't go as far as ill-conceived. I think the goals are admirable, but I think the way the infrastructure is set up, it's not conducive to achieving the goal.
So you think we should start over again, and that the work that's gone into the last 6 years has been useless?
No, I would never say it's useless. I would say there's just tremendous opportunities to revamp the structure and the incentives and the permitting structure. And I want to hear from some of the technology vendors and some of the other companies on this, because I've spoken to them many times over the years on this.
To me, sorry for being political, this sounds like repealing the Affordable Care Act with no plan. And what I think we really need from you is concrete individual suggestions about how to look at and implement the law as it is, as opposed to some imagined world, which isn't likely to happen, of the legislature going, never mind, we had it all wrong.
No, actually, I'm not going to say it's imagined, because there's plenty of case studies of countries that's achieved basically over 90% diversion from landfills. And there are technologies and facilities that are basically international teaching models that anybody can visit. And these are all written up. And I've actually provided links to Crystal on this as the reference documents. And there's policy documents that we can follow to kind of revise our law. I'm not saying throw it out, I say revise it.
And
We
we
could
will
go on, but let's let others participate.
I say we will disseminate the links that Mr. Singh shared with us. Okay, so Commissioner Sidley and Commissioner Garcetti have their hands up, and then I think we should move on to the other participants who have comments to make.
So I just want to very briefly say to all, I see a lot of people have their hands up. If you can also, as you talk, discuss the cost associated. I mean, some of the smaller counties were complaining about the cost of doing the separation. So as we talk about this, if you have ideas that may lower costs, or if what Eugene is suggesting raises costs, just if you would add that to the discussion, I would appreciate hearing that, because I think that it's the cost that is a impediment for some of the counties to implement. And then that's all I have, is just to keep that concept in mind. So thank you all very much. I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Sidley, and to all of the commissioners and other panelists. Eugene has just shared the links in the chat function. Okay, so Commissioner Garcetti, please, and then we will move on to Alex, followed by Cody, followed by Yaniv, followed by Ron, followed by Chuck.
Well, I hope everyone can follow that. Mr. Singh, thank you for being so candid and forward. The question I have is, did you testify in front of the legislature, any subcommittee, anyone, or did you submit your points of view to the legislature if you did not personally appear in front of a committee or the legislature, either house?
Actually, I way back in the 1990s, I'm very old, about where 939 should be going, and it incorporates everything I just said. It's just I've had a lot more international.
So you did not,
but not on 1383.
Okay, not 1383. Were you called to testify and you declined, or you were never asked to come and testify?
Never asked to testify, but I think provided 1,200 pages of comments on the initial set of regulations.
Okay. May I ask about the show of hands for those of you who are not commissioners, if you did in fact testify or submit any ideas for this legislation before it was adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor? Would you raise your hand and say, yes, I appeared? One person? That's all I see. Alex? Okay. Sean? 3. Okay. Neil? 9. Okay, thank you. It gives me a perspective of where we are.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcetti. Alex, did you have any other comments to make at this point?
Well, I hadn't made any comments yet.
I'm sorry. Yes, I got that. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Nava and commissioners, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Alex Oseguera. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Waste Management here in California. To answer the question of what is our footprint or somewhat our footprint, we operate about 54 hauling operations, collection companies. We have 28 transfer stations that move materials, 21 material recycling facilities. Those include also organic facilities. And we do operate 14 landfills. In terms of my comments, they're more to do with what's happening on the ground and some of the initial things that we are running into. Definitely a complex piece of legislation and then regulation. It touches every part of what we do, not only as an industry, but many businesses. For example, it includes redoing, policies at cities, implementing new collection services, developing new infrastructure, the movement of materials, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very complex. What we're experiencing on the ground currently, there are procurement requirements in the regulation. The comments I want to make there are that there are a number of cities throughout California that were early adopters in terms of placing services to the residents and collection of materials. In those regions, there were functioning markets for utilization of those organic materials that were turning to soil amendments, other materials. And currently the procurement regulation does not allow the free movement of those materials where those functioning markets develop. There is in the regulation language regarding municipalities having to procure materials. And the intent of the law was to ensure that if there wasn't a market, that markets developed. What has been the impact currently because of the regulation is there are certain functioning markets that are being impacted because some of that material now has to be purchased by municipalities or procured by municipalities and then sent out to the marketplace. Where what should happen in that case should be that if those markets exist, then those cities should be getting credits. Also, something that might seem minor, but it's affected out there, the production of mulch. So as you can imagine, up and down the state, there's a significant amount of woody material that's being chipped and grinded and then utilized out in different applications to help with soil amendments, carbon sequestration, et cetera, et cetera. However, if you have a strictly chipping and grinding location that is not fully permitted as a facility, you can't utilize that material for credit. So we're seeing that as an issue out there. And so definitely a need for clarification on that. Once again, I'm in the weeds with some of my comments, but it kind of begins to show a little bit of what we're dealing with. There are regulations regarding food soil paper that is currently not defined in the regulation, although non-compostable paper is defined. However, our facilities do not have the ability to discern between both of those. And so there's definitely some need to take a look at that part of the regulation. There's a significant amount of material that we are handling. And so important that we address that item. I want to highlight for folks in terms of RNG, once again, early adopters across the state made significant investments in facilities, not only for the development and of renewable natural gas. Sorry, Commissioner, I said an acronym, sorry. So the renewable natural gas. And I can talk about waste management specifically. About 80-something% of our fleet runs on renewable natural gas. We have made significant investment to make sure that we have not only early adoption, but we have environmental benefits being provided to citizens across the state. However, there's currently what seems to be a discrepancy with what we're looking towards electrification and still what the need, which is the utilization of RNG and the creation of RNG. And so we believe that it's extremely important that that option is continued to be available. At WM, we're agnostic to technology when it's available. However, we have real solutions currently with not only the creation of RNG, the vehicles utilizing the RNG, and making sure that we have near zero vehicles operating in our communities. That's a real benefit. So an area that probably goes beyond Cal Recycle, but there is a need for Cal Recycle and the Air Resources Board to be having discussions to ensure that that is a viable option.
Alex?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Pedro Nava. Sorry, Crystal. With respect to with the RNG, the vehicles, did you have to perform conversions of the engines of some sort, modifications?
At the beginning of when we did our conversions and started, piloting them, yes. Then later in the cycle, you buy directly vehicles that are manufactured for utilization of RNG,
Okay.
Or CNG.
So this is one of the practical things that I like to focus on. There's an expense associated, one, with the conversion, and two, the purchase of vehicles that are RNG compliant or whatever it's called. So what does that represent to a company like yours? The investment in either the conversion or purchasing a vehicle that uses RNG. Because it seems to me that at some point, what you have to be concerned about is being told that's not good enough, that you've got to go all electric. So is there a number that you can give me what that represents to how you operate?
In terms of the overall investment, Chair Nava, I mean, we're talking the hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of investments. Those not only are in terms of the fleet itself, in terms of the vehicles, it's making sure you have the connections into your facilities to be able to fast fill or slow fill your vehicles. It's making sure you develop facilities that produce RNG. I mean, currently, and I know sometimes we try to quote unquote have the landfills as a bad thing, right? I understand that we need to continue to move forward to reuse and reductions in terms of what's produced. However, our facilities, our landfill facilities are capturing gas that's been there for 50 years, right? In terms of the materials that are there, we are capturing it, making sure that we are scrubbing it and turning it back into energy, back into our vehicles. So although I do understand what Eugene's saying mentions in terms of landfills, I do want to make a comment that there are well-run landfills in the state of California. We are partners with the study that was done across not only California, but that's going across the United States, showing that there are needs for improvement, but there are facilities that do run very well.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to leave this, but I think this is part of what Commissioner Sidley is talking about. If you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, you're not getting that money from God. That money has to come back from someone. And in all likelihood, it's going to be the ratepayer, because 1383 provides for recovery of those expenses associated with the program from the ratepayer. So I just think a realistic assessment of where we're going and how we're going to do it includes, and it doesn't often get talked about because sometimes industry is seen as complaining or whining, but the truth of the matter is when you're asked to be making these changes, it costs money, and that money has to be recovered from somewhere if that enterprise is going to be successful. Again, if you're successful, you can put people to work, you write paychecks, they get to pay their bills. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
And so I guess I'll end by saying that, SB 1383 complex, once again, it touches every portion of our solid waste, services, also the cities, what they're providing. Now that we're in on the ground in implementation, there's a tremendous need for, ensuring that if something was written a certain way, but it's not really working or it needs some modifications, that we do that's the conversation. Because once again, for us to be successful with the regulation and the law and get to the benefits that are expected in terms of environmentalism, there needs to be dialogue. Once again, I highlighted at the beginning, procurement. Why not continue to utilize functioning markets? That should not be impacted, but yet the regulation is impacting it now. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to provide you with some information. Thank you.
Cody?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to join the roundtable. Already, it's been very insightful just hearing some different perspectives. I mean, we have a very narrow focus. My name is Cody Cain. I'm Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Agromin, California, one of California's largest organic waste processors. And we're a little bit unique. We're kind of like Switzerland, as our CEO likes to say. We sit in a bit of a hub. And so we're receiving organic waste that is diverted from landfills to process. We processed over 1.2 million tons of organic waste last year. And so once we take that organic waste, we then convert that into consumable products. So soil amendment products, whether it's bagging products or whether it's bulk products for agriculture, for retail, for lots. So we have 23 locations around the state. And what I wanted to focus on really is just directly on the SB 1383 side, how it's affecting Agromin specifically, and the responses and the feedback we're getting from the jurisdiction. So we basically, when I joined Agromin, we started a program called CaliforniaCompost.net, and California Compost was designed to be a resource for jurisdictions facing the challenges of procurement and reporting for SB 1383. So it's a very narrow part of the bill, I know. So, SB 1383 is huge. Ours is, we're just staying in our lane, SB 1383 purchase and reporting requirements. And so that's really what we have been focusing on explicitly. I feel for the jurisdictions because they've got lots of different, irons in the fire they have to pay attention to, lots of different criteria for being fined potentially. And so I recognize that, ours is not the first to experience fines. So therefore we're going to be the lowest down the totem pole in importance. And I find that what we're hearing from the jurisdictions is the same thing across the board, which is, how are they doing this to us? How do they expect us to pay for this? Where's the money going to come from? We were just at the California League of Cities Expo, and we had a booth, and I literally spoke to probably 20 mayors, mostly smaller towns, I will admit, that were struggling with, how do we pay for this? How do we implement this? There's no resources, no information. Literally, I was spoon feeding them SB 1383 information at the booth, because they were thinking they could sell it off and get the money back and fill up the coffers again. And so there's a lot of ambiguity, I think, in the jurisdictions as to what is required of them. And I think some clarity came through with AB 1985 that we've gone through in depth, because obviously that affects our business specifically, because we're the ones who are processing all the waste and we have to redistribute it. And we've found that it's a challenge to redistribute when there's very little guidance for jurisdictions or to unincorporated areas as to how to meet that criteria, right? So does my compost that I've been composting in my city, does that qualify? And in most cases it doesn't, for numerous reasons, but they don't understand, what does that mean for my city? How is this, how do I react to this? So we're accumulating as much information as we can, talking to as many jurisdictions as we can, talking to other parties like the ag community, to the resource conservation district, in hopes of circumventing future problems, which we see as being everybody running to buy compost at the same time, all the time, which is in the spring and in the autumn. And then finding that we don't, because of a lack of infrastructure and availability, we're going to have it's like a run on the bank. It's going to be a run on the compost. People are going to get up disappointed. So we know, because we've been distributing this for 30 years. This is as our CEO says, we spent 30 years becoming an overnight success. So we were not flavor of the month for about 25 years, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to know composters, right? It's a very, very strong juxtaposition. But what it does show us is that if we had said 2022, all of everybody's supposed to hit 100% of their mandates, we would not have the facilities nor the ability to distribute the compost to all of the facilities anyway. We have a number of facilities, Waste, Republic, Harrison's, all the waste haulers have got lots of facilities, but the problem is number of them, again, are not going to be of any use to somebody who's up in the high desert, or somebody who's up in the Sierra Nevadas and in Butte, or some of these places, Green Valley. These places don't have a lot of people, and to get any kind of compost out to there that qualifies could be 5 to 10 times the cost of the actual compost. And so we have a sourcing problem. We don't have a lack of compost. We could produce enough compost to meet demand. We just don't have enough facilities, which leads me to the main point I want to make. I'm sorry for the roundabout angle, is I know that there was AB 1045 that was implemented in hopes of making permitting and applications in this area easier. And I can honestly say from Agromin's perspective, that has not been the case. It took us 12 years and $2 million to permit our Limonera facility in the county of Ventura. It took multiple jumps through hoops, and finally we got approved. But 12 years and $2 million, frankly, is not an easy path to developing a facility to process 300,000 tons of organic waste, which is what SB 1383 is all about in the first place. So if we start saying that, there's a real conflict there in execution versus promise, right? And if we want to be able to manage the amount of waste that's going to be increasing as a result of these diversion goals, then we have to have more facilities to be able to access the locations where people need the compost. So, that's what I would say just for the moment. That's kind of where our biggest concerns are. And I'll remain, we're very open-minded. We engage with everybody, talk about solutions. Some cities have figured out some things, others haven't. We try and share and cross-feed the information as much as we can. I'm also spearheading working groups in the county of Ventura County, because we recognize the challenge that we're going to have about the mass rush for compost when it's needed. So we're trying to really organize something at a county level, identify what the requirements are for each city, and if there is an excess that needs to be placed somewhere, where is that going to go? What's the priority in which, is it going to go to ag? Is it going to go to conservation projects? Where is that destination of the excess compost? Now, initially 2023, it's only 30% of the requirements need to be met. That's probably inside the city. You can probably get rid of most of that. But you start getting to 65% and 100%, in places like Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Francisco, they don't have enough places to put all this compost. So, we're working with, for example, the city of Sacramento to set up a carbon farming opportunity where all the money goes into, or all the compost gets moved out there, and we're starting to get the carbon into the soil in the ag communities. But we need more of those opportunities, frankly, to be able to move this compost and figure out ways to deal with the increase in cost for transportation. That's really the biggest barrier that we find for all of the jurisdictions. They say, we can afford the compost, we just can't afford the transportation. So anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Mr. Cain, I believe Commissioner Cannella has a question for you.
Great.
I do, thanks. I thought you answered my question, and then I didn't know if you did, so I'm just going to ask it directly. I'll make a statement, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So at this point, there's not enough plants to treat the organic material, and there are not enough customers to take the treated material. Is that correct?
I would say that's partially correct. I think right now there's enough facilities, but the problem is they're very centralized in certain locations. And so without a broader distribution model to accommodate for all of those populations that are not in large, cities, where it's much easier for the distribution of product, and even the outskirts of areas, LA County, all that's still pretty easy to move product around. But when you get the Inland Empire, you get in the high deserts, it becomes cost prohibitive, right? So I work for Agromin, and I just got a delivery of compost, but I couldn't get it from my own company because it costs too much to get it to my location. So I had to order it from Burtech in Bakersfield to have it delivered because that's the only way it was an affordable transaction. The compost is given away. They've given it away until October because they got too much of it, right? But for me to get it to myself, I got to pay for the transportation, right? So this becomes the prohibitive issue. I think it's less of an issue as the cost of fertilizer starts to increase. If the demand is going to increase for I would say alternative organic products that are locally sourced. So I think more to the point is the permitting to get these facilities to expand distribution is the challenge we face.
Have you shared with Cal Recycle the challenges that we have as far as remote locations don't have the capability to process this stuff? Have you ever had that discussion with them?
I haven't personally, no. I mean, maybe Edgar has, because he works closely with Agromin in many ways, but we haven't personally. I'm not aware of us having that conversation. It's a little outside of our focus, right? I'm trying to stay in my lane, but make sure I stay as focused as I can and not try to be too many things to too many people.
Okay, I believe Commissioner Byer also has a question for you.
Yes, thank you. As fellow commissioners know, I usually ask this question of witnesses. And so this is both to you and the prior witness from Waste Management. If you had 1 minute with Governor Newsom and you had an opportunity to suggest a single most important reform to this particular piece of law, what would it be and why?
I think from my point of view, on Agromin's point of view, I think we really have to get down to the permitting side of things. I really think that is where things are getting held up across the board. I mean, even just one facility that we have a drop curb issue. We can't start operations in Oxnard for a food processing plant because of a drop curb issue that we still have to get approved to go. I mean, so we're talking about like minutia that is tripping up large movements, right? So we're tripping over the pebbles and we're forgetting about the boulders that we have to move forward. So if we want to process as much organic waste as we're going to be forcing, away from the landfills, we have to be thinking about getting these facilities up fast. And, composting facilities aren't that complicated, right? So it's not massive amounts of technology. Now you got a biogas facility, that's something totally different. But, composting facilities, yes, there's groundwater issues. There's a lot of things we have to adhere to, but we're used to doing that. So let's just speed up the process of permitting for these facilities so that we can better manage that distribution of compost and mulch when it's needed by 2025, when everybody's got to buy 100%.
And for me, I mean, I would tell Governor Newsom, number one, the importance of RNG and environmental benefit right now. It's helping now. Once again, we're agnostic to technology, but we should be utilizing the infrastructure that's in place. The benefits are in place, and the investments not only made by us, the wastewater folks as well, in terms of utilizing that renewable energy source. And I would actually tell the governor two things. And the second thing would be functioning markets for organic materials. If markets are functioning and moving, allow and ensure that the regulation allows those materials to move. And in those places that there isn't, to Cody's comment, there isn't the either the market or the market is not functioning to provide assistance.
Thank you. Just a brief follow-up. During our last hearing, we had senior state officials, and I raised the question about changing implementation. I wasn't specific about how to change it, whether it was a delay, a change in the percentage, et cetera. And the pushback, which was pretty strong, was, gee, investors won't like that because they like certainty. That is, the market's going to be structured in a particular way, and they don't want to move the goalposts. And if either of you could comment about that question of implementation, either changing the goals or delay, and or your investment decisions to create more facilities, that would be useful.
Thank you, Commissioner Barr. This is Pedro Nava. I just also want to let people know we've got, and this is very encouraging, we got 10 of our participants have their hands up. So go ahead and respond to that. Thank you.
So repeat the question again for me, please.
Sure.
I just don't think, Commissioner, that modifications to the program to make it more effective creates uncertainty. Whether that is, a bigger or longer bridge to implementation, right? But we're not talking here that we're looking at that folks have made investments and all of a sudden they shouldn't be utilized anymore, which would create market disruption, right? But here we're looking at what needs to be done in order to make certain modifications to make the program work better. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I mean, I would say I'm kind of a similar opinion. I think clarity is better for investors. So, I mean, investors are looking at a broad. We've had a number of investor discussions over the last couple of years, and a lot of them are blind to the minutia. They like the space. They like the push that California is making. But unless they're based in California, they're pretty much as clueless as everybody else is as to what is SB 1383 exactly, how does this affect these investments. There's a lot of gray area in this, and I think again the clarification from Newsom on exactly what the requirements are for 2023, 2024, and 2025 for the purchases is helpful. I think it's helpful because now you don't have the cities going, well, this is impossible. How are we going to possibly ramp up? And so now from our point of view, we've invested our own cash in developing these platforms. We weren't raising any outside money because, like, how do you describe this? We live this, we breathe this. This is an investment in our community. This is an investment in our business and our relationships that we know we have to be there because this is a combined effort, right? The citizens of the state voted for SB 1383. We see ourselves as stewards of the implementation of this process. Now, yes, we're going to run into speed bumps, and yes, we're going to run into challenges, but that's, business is all about solving problems. So you've just given us another problem to solve, and we're happy to be creative and look to different methodologies, technologies, strategies that we can help the jurisdictions to implement because we're dealing with this every day. So I want guidance, I want clarity because it allows me to operate my business better. Now I know I have about 30% threshold every city has got to buy at the end of 2023. I can start to forecast better. Roughly that's 1 million tons of organic matter or compost to be bought. Now you offset that with some, small purchases of gas around the state or renewable energy there, which is very small as an option. So mostly we're talking about almost 1 million tons of organic waste that's going to be purchased as part of the procurement process. We processed and sold 1.2 million last year. So there's a lot still to come our way. And I think that's what we need to be most mindful of. We're just at the beginning. The more clarity we can get, the easier it is for the jurisdictions to know what they have to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Cain. I'd like to take a second to welcome Senator Nielsen to the meeting. Welcome, Senator. And our next participant with their hand up is Yaniv. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioners. It's truly a pleasure to speak today. My name is Yaniv Sherson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with a company called Energia. We're a global publicly traded company that builds anaerobic digester facilities. And behind me, you see the largest food waste anaerobic digester in North America. What these facilities do is they take food waste that we separate from trash and convert it into renewable natural gas. What's nice about renewable natural gas is that it's a fuel that is interchangeable with natural gas, meaning it's the exact same molecule, and it can be distributed through the natural gas distribution system and used in vehicles, for heating or for power production.
I'm sorry, we are getting some feedback here. If everyone could mute themselves, and I will too. And can you try again?
How's it sound now?
Still feedback. Let me see. Ron, can you try? There we go. Okay.
It's okay now?
No.
No.
Actually, it's an echo. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Crystal,
Okay.
Does it sound okay or not?
It's echoey, but I think at least I can understand what you're saying. So let's just proceed.
My goodness, I'm so sorry. Let me try. I don't want to waste time. Is this any better?
Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah, way better.
great. My apologies. So very briefly, Energia, global company, publicly traded. We build biogas facilities. Behind me is the Rialto Bioenergy Facility, which is one of a number of plants we've built in California to take food waste and organic waste that's separated from trash, whether it's in a mixed waste bin or whether it's in a source separated organics bin in either bin. We take that organic waste and we convert it into renewable natural gas and fertilizer. And as I mentioned, renewable natural gas is convenient because it meets the procurement requirement under 1383, as does the fertilizer. So two methods to meet the procurement requirement, and it's plug and play, immediately dispatchable fuel in the existing natural gas grid and immediately usable in existing compressed natural gas vehicles like the trash trucks that are collecting waste today. There's in the spirit of cost, addressing the issue of cost, and in the spirit of addressing specific recommendations to improve what is a foundational and a fantastic bill that will have the biggest needle mover in climate change, I'd like to address 2 points. One is 1383, if we look at the goal, is the most ambitious climate bill in history. It will shift, if successful, over 20 million tons of organic waste from the leading source of methane release, to Eugene's point. And this is now internationally recognized in the wake of COP26. Methane is the #1 greenhouse gas emission. We must eliminate it in the immediate term if we want to hope in avoiding the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. So in order to achieve this, we need to ensure that there is total diversion from the landfill. One of the challenges with 1383 is that there's 2 choices for jurisdictions to make. The ideal solution is everybody signs up for 3-bin collection: blue for recyclables, black for trash, green for food waste or organic waste. And this is an ideal way to go, but it's not practical for every jurisdiction, for every single community. For example, high-rise apartment buildings or restaurants that have limited parking space in the back. And so what Eugene's point was making before is a real point, that the collection cost is typically the highest cost across the life cycle of waste management, and adding a separate collection as a primary choice limits the amount of food waste we can really capture. What happens is when folks source separate, food waste still remains in the trash can. So we're still sending to landfills, and it's inflexible. It's inflexible. And one of the recommendations we suggest is that in option 1, when there's 3 bins, there's sort of a path of lesser resistance. In option 2, when mixed waste processing happens, meaning there's a blue and black, so there's some source separation, and we separate the organic waste from the black, it goes to a high diversion facility that has to meet a numeric target. This numeric target does not have to be met in option 1, it does have to be met in option 2. So naturally, it pushes towards a single collection option, which happens to be more costly, although the best way to go. And it also happens to be challenging, particularly for urban centers and disenfranchised communities, like in Metro Southern California, where we operate. So that's one recommendation for improving what is already a great bill. The second.
Can we interrupt just a second? I believe Commissioner Cannella had a question about what you're just saying.
Yeah, sorry. Just a couple questions, and if you want to answer them with your presentation, that's fine. But first question is, how long did it take to permit and build that plant? The second one, is there a market for RNG? And then how much more expensive is RNG over natural gas? So if you want to incorporate that in your comments, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's actually brilliantly segued into point number 2, which is the market for RNG. But to make sure I answer the questions, this facility took about 4 years from the go button to permit and build. Cost was $180 million. It is roughly 100 of facilities of this size will be needed to meet the 1383 diversion target. So you can get a sense of the amount of private investment that will need to come. We've invested about $300 million in California private investment, and certainty is important. I definitely would underscore the prior comment that with delays in implementation and lack of enforcement, which has been the case, there's a lot of investor questioning if to invest into a market and bring private infrastructure, which is necessary. And then as far as the RNG, what happens with RNG is that it benefits from federal and state credits in the LCFS program and federal RIN. And so what ends up happening is that to a user, it's actually cheaper than natural gas, meaning to a fleet will actually use renewable natural gas to run a vehicle and benefit from a portion of the revenues from those RIN and LCFS credits. So it actually ends up being lower cost. What RNG also does is that now if organics recycling facility has two revenue streams, tipping fees and gas sales from RNG. So the more, the higher value of the RNG means the lower the cost the tipping fees can be, which means it's ultimately lower cost to the customer, to the waste hauler, and so it's an elegant solution to also lowering costs through carbon subsidy, through carbon markets. But issue number two is the market. Currently, there is only one market, which is the low carbon fuel standard to sell into. And this goes out of the scope of CalRecycle, but is along the lines of recommendations on collaborations with CalRecycle and CARB to ensure that there is a market, that there remains to be a market that is that assigns the proper value to renewable natural gas that's generated from landfill diverted organic waste. I'll leave it at there, but to say that currently the issue is that the market for renewable natural gas from landfill diverted organic waste is materially lower than what it should be because the value is related to how much methane is eliminated from diversion from landfills. And as Eugene said, we've been undercounting quite significantly. So California generated food waste renewable natural gas is at a disadvantage in the low carbon fuel standard to out of state dairy gas that has a substantially higher value and is displacing. So it's a challenge that if we can't sell the gas, we can't help cities meet procurement requirements, and we can't build facilities. The last point I'll just say is really the need for enforcement. We built this facility, the largest in North America, certainly the biggest, servicing Los Angeles primarily, to be online and ready in January of 2022, the original sort of deadline. And because of the delays in enforcement, in part due to COVID, the facility has been grossly underfed, and it's a story of many digester facilities. We have other facilities as well. And so it's really important to ensure that enforcement stays on time, that it comes firmly. Facilities like this exist. We heard many of the facilities are here and ready. We can build them, but if there's going to be a delay in enforcement and compliance delays, then investor confidence goes away and future facilities won't be built.
Thank you. Our next participant with their hand up is Ron.
Sorry, I done mute myself.
Ron, you are breaking up on us.
Here we go. I just, I'm sorry, must be the internet. Can you hear me now?
Yes, intermittently.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, everybody. And my name is Ron Cline. I'm with Ecosphere Sciences. I have spent the last 10 years in helping to self-fund research on waste and have traveled through Canada, the United States, Mexico, South America, the Middle East on waste problems, and also China, by the way. It's a large problem regulatory wise, and for waste companies, it's huge. Ecosphere Sciences, we have just introduced a new tool for waste companies and municipalities. Very simply, we put all organic waste, any and all type of organic waste in our system. We utilize a biodigester with a proprietary mix formula and safely process into a compost looking material in less than 1 hour, all types of organics. It looks similar to compost, yet it is not. We're going currently through laboratory research right now to prove safely the viability of this as a growth enhancement formula. It actually improves naturally growth patterns for all types of plants. Just the last 6 weeks we spent in the mid part of California in the agricultural industry processing food waste for a food processor. This has resulted in two things. One is a 100-ton per day facility will be erected around January of next year. That will be expanded over to 500 tons a day within the next year and a half after that. And we also have partnered or in the middle of partnering with a fertilizer facility that want 100% every ounce of our output because of what they've already found the results are. This is not something new. We use aerobic technology as opposed to anaerobic. And we're just one more tool that can be used to solve this major problem. First thing, what I just explained to you, normally different parts of the world, I get people scratching their heads. How in the heck can you take trash and in 45 minutes convert it into a liquid fertilizer? Well, the technologies existed in nature for years. It's just we learned how to speed it up. That's about all I can say about our technology. It's very basic. It's extremely fast, very sufficient, and the footprint is extremely small. Now, I'd like to praise more about what we have, yet there are other gentlemen here within this Zoom format that have created other products. To me, SB 1383 is something very simple. It's created a force to drive us towards a better environment, a better future. That's the positive side that I see. Are there regulatory problems? Yes. The interesting thing is where we did our demonstration because of SB 1383, everybody there in the city and county governments want to move towards and do something to solve their problems. That's the motivation behind the regulation. And so because of that, permitting is going to be a little easier. Believe me, I've worked in many countries. We've also worked off and on with Los Alamos National Labs. So I know that regulatory problems occur, make delays, and can cause problems, yet they're also a motivation for new technologies and solutions. And so I'd like to thank you for letting me participate.
Thank you. Chuck, you're up next.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Crystal. Good afternoon, commissioners. Chuck Helget with Republic Services. We operate throughout California, waste hauler. We run landfills. We have a significant amount of composting capacity in California. We partner with Agromin. And we've generally have found that SB 1383, while, and I'll discuss some of these, certainly has some regulatory issues that need to be resolved and that could be resolved with more regulatory flexibility. Generally speaking, supportive of the efforts, and we are, quite frankly, too far down the road at this point in implementing 1383 to do a 100% change in how we're operating. But certainly, I think the regulations themselves, in any regulatory process, there are going to be subsequent changes necessary to make sure that the system works. And I think that's sort of the stage that we're in right now. SB 1383 is by far the most significant piece of policy that we have seen in the waste industry in the past 30 years. It has had a significant impact on our operations, on local governments, and many of those have been positive. The evolution of organics processing and organics and the use of organics is moving in the right direction, albeit not, I would say, fast enough. The implementation of SB 1383, I think, needs to be viewed regionally. There are significant changes in how we look, how Republic looks at our implementation process in Northern California as opposed to Southern California. Northern California has a significantly more mature market, and markets are the key, as my friend Alex Oseguera noted earlier, and I would like to echo his comments, by the way. And it's also a much more mature infrastructure in Northern California. Southern California, a very different question. Level of compliance was something that I think Yaniv mentioned earlier, and mandating compliance and signing people up for service. And that's where we're going to be pulling these organics from. And the level of service in Southern California, at least for us, generally is around 10%. So 10% of our commercial customers right now are actually have bins in their backyard, in the back of their operation, and are using our services. In Northern California, I think that's significantly higher, probably even in the range of 40%. So I think it just would indicate the importance of having mature markets and mature infrastructure in place to process this material. Now, it also tells us that if we're only picking up 10% of the market in Southern California and roughly half of it in Northern California, there's a lot of material out there yet to be collected. And I think this leads then to the point that others have made, that we still have a big jump to go in terms of processing equipment. We have to pull the food waste into our system, and we have to process it. We've adapted a system that uses a Thor, which is a large circular hammer that pummels food waste into a paste and separates out as much of the contaminations as we can, typically plastic bags. And that material then can go to an AD facility. But we are very much in the early stages of implementing all of that. But once the compliance increases, we're going to have a flood of organics into the system. And if there aren't markets to manage that material, whether it be biogas or whether it be compost, we're going to encounter a problem, because then the ability to fund the infrastructure will fall back, I think, as the chair indicated earlier, fall back on the rate base. And that's something that, we've seen already in significant rate increases to comply with SB 1383, but we've gotten what, 20% of the way there. There are significant costs coming down the pike again in order to develop the infrastructure that's needed to implement 1383. And again, I would echo some of the earlier comments. 1383 is a significant piece and a positive piece of legislation, but we've got to get it figured out. Otherwise, the cost of this system is going to overwhelm our rate base, and it's going to take a significant amount of cooperation from policymakers, from the waste industry, composting industry, and local jurisdictions in particular, to make sure that we're implementing this in the most effective and cost-effective way. A couple of small, those are my kind of overarching comments, but a couple of more details in terms of how can we make this system more effective? How can we cut the costs or make the costs much, much more manageable? And again, it's going to take a lot of cooperation from everyone, but there are several aspects of how the regulations are structured right now. And I'll give you one small example on the composting side. Local jurisdictions are required to procure compost. And we think, unfortunately, right now, the regulations require them to procure the compost and give it away. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, because we also have operating compost facilities that are trying to sell this material. But on the border jurisdictions, borders with Nevada and Arizona, many of those jurisdictions don't have access to composting facilities within a reasonable distance. And I think Yaniv or somebody said the costs of a large part of the cost of composting can be attributed to the transportation costs. They send their material across the border to composting facilities in Arizona and Nevada. But we have found, because of the regulatory structure, Cal Recycle has been unwilling to allow a material shipped out of state for composting to count as procurement if that compost is procured back. And we think that's a significant problem, particularly for jurisdictions on the border that have no place to go with that material. Another issue that we've raised, I think over time has been just the need for regulatory flexibility. That the regs were adopted, and we have found a reluctance in Cal Recycle's perspective to adopt changes that would, in ways maybe adjust the compliance schedules, or in ways that would adjust the procurement requirements. And we think some additional flexibility there could help lower the costs. Again, we're going to have to figure out how to add 100 to 150 new facilities in California, whether they be AD facilities or composting facilities. There's going to be significant cost associated with that. So to answer, I think, although you didn't ask me the question, Commissioner Byer, I will answer it for you. If I were sitting down with Gavin Newsom today, I would say that what we need more than anything is what was promised to us when 1383 was initially proposed. And that is that there would be state level funding to subsidize and help subsidize the development of the infrastructure needed in California. We have had some of that money provided by the legislature and by the governor's office, but it's not been nearly enough. When you think, I believe the long-term costs of implementing SB 1383 is something in the range of $40 billion. A large part of that is this development of infrastructure. So I would ask that the legislature find the heart to put some more money into providing Cal Recycle the ability to issue grants and to some degree loans to provide support for the expanding infrastructure that's going to be needed to manage the flood of organics material that's going to be coming down the pipeline, or it's going to end up on the rate base. With that, I'll stick around for a while to answer any questions if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Rebecca. Rebecca, go ahead and unmute and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Crystal. Can you hear me okay? Crystal, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Rebecca O'Brien. I am Director of Marketing and Client Relations with True North Renewable Energy, and our President, Gary Aguinaga, is on the panel as well. So we really appreciate you inviting us on to talk about, what we're seeing in the market and opportunities and challenges and all of the above with SB 1383. As the commissioners requested, just to give you a quick context, True North Renewable Energy, we're currently developing large-scale regional high solids anaerobic digestion infrastructure with a main focus on Southern California. So we have anaerobic digestion with advanced composting, which means we can take commingled material like yard trimmings, grass clippings, food waste. We just wanted to also acknowledge, as many of the panelists have said, that there's been tremendous successes, I think, with passing of this bill. There's been a lot of attention over the last several years on changing collection practices and hitting implementation and enforcement deadlines, and a huge monumental task of educating businesses and residents about the importance of diverting organics away from landfill. And I think, while of course this is, all very important, and I guess really just to echo some of the other panelists' comments, there's clearly a need to also focus on the increasing infrastructure needs and capacity needs, really, to ensure that SB 1383 is successful. And I guess just by way of clarity, when I say infrastructure, as Chuck mentioned and others, I'm talking about those facilities that are going to be needed and the processing solutions that will need to be upgraded and more realistically constructed to really handle the diverted organics that we're talking about, especially when the food content really starts to ramp up in the coming years. As we all know, CalRecycle and other stakeholders have reported that anywhere from 50 to 100, and Chuck, you just actually mentioned a higher number of new facilities like advanced composting, like anaerobic digestion facilities are really going to need to be constructed to process all this diverted material. And those new facilities, to meet the state's climate goals, are going to have the best in class emissions controls and provide those byproducts, like the soil amending products Cody was speaking about, and also other co-benefits like renewable natural gas, which Yaniv, we were just talking about that. And I just wanted to really tack on to Yaniv's point about the opportunity with the low carbon fuel standard. But also just to note, I guess, to the commissioners that now with the PUC's renewable gas standard, this requires utilities to procure increasing volumes of renewable natural gas with specific requirements for that renewable natural gas from diverted organic waste. And that lines up with SB 1383. And there's going to have to be sufficient volumes of renewable natural gas to come to market to support these states' broader climate change goals. And I guess just wanted to make, the basic point that to ensure that the quantity of diverted organics derived renewable natural gas required under the PUC and for procurement under SB 1383, I think we all recognize that new infrastructure must be built and placed into operation as quickly as possible. So quite basically, the utilities cannot purchase biogas if there's no infrastructure to produce it, and infrastructure to produce it will not develop if the state and the jurisdictions and the haulers perhaps continue to, focus on sort of existing solutions or legacy infrastructure over developing new infrastructure that really can produce these additional co-benefits. So again, some of these points have already been made, but I think we're all in agreement that, there's the speedy infrastructure is one of the biggest priorities now to ensure the success of SB 1383. So
Commissioner Sidley, do you have a question for Rebecca?
I have actually a comment, and it's building upon what Rebecca has just said, and Chuck, and a little bit of Alex, and this discussion about infrastructure. Just to be thinking a tad bit out of the box, but we do also know that CARB just passed a rule that California will not have, petroleum-based cars in 2035. So everybody has infrastructure needs, not just for the recycling of these organic waste, but also for the influx of whatever these new cars and new technology is coming online. And I'm just wondering, as you are all talking about your new technology and what the infrastructure that you're building, et cetera, if there is thought going in, or anybody from CARB or anybody is talking to you as well about fueling stations for what the cars may or may not look like. I know, and also, I come from the port, so obviously refueling these huge trucks. I know that most people are technology neutral when it comes to the new type of car, et cetera, except that you can't use fossil fuels. And so it's just really a thought that I'm having. If everybody is there an economies of scale? Is there a multi-use? If, as Chuck pointed out, there needs to be more money from the legislature, can they get two things out of one if we're just investing in the recycling infrastructure? So it's really more of a thought that I'm trying to stretch the government dollar if it's possible. And so I just put that out there as part of this very fascinating discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sidley, and thank you, Rebecca. Our next participant is Neil.
Good afternoon, commissioners, and really appreciate the discussion and the hearing, being invited to speak. I think, so I'm the executive director of the California Compost Coalition. We're a 20-year-old organization that represents largely commercial composters that are handling anaerobic digesters, in a few cases, but largely municipal green waste and food materials that are being composted. I think in the big picture, the largest picture, there's been no discussion here about the real need to have this be a part of a circular economy for organics. So moving these organic materials from the point of generation, which turns out are farm fields across California and across the country, and having those nutrients end up back on those farm fields is a critical element of regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture. And to that end, we need to have distributed infrastructure facilities across the state, mainly focused on how those materials are moved back, hopefully to local economies to reduce the overall transportation strain, the additional cost, the additional miles, but right-sizing the operations to the communities that they serve in order to help better utilize all the additional efforts that go into getting these facilities sited. We had, for the last 6 years, tried to get a bill by Senator Aguilar Curry in 3 different versions passed through the legislature that would have some academic entity or the Office of Planning and Research, Strategic Growth Council, a number of different approaches to have the legislature authorize funding and have a study done that would identify how we can look outside of just the solid waste silo that we're working and talking about today, and talk about agricultural waste, forestry waste, and other sources that are also a part of SB 1383, and have separate, distinct programs, but there is a very little effort, and we could not get the bill passed, to take a more comprehensive look at how we can better utilize the funding that comes out of all 3 of those sectors to produce local solutions. So we have areas of the state and forest land like Susanville or Humboldt Coast where they have to have solutions to this, and they're not able to help develop any cross funding. And in fact, a lot of times the funding is being doled out at cross purposes. So the governor's office, when Governor Brown was in office, put a lot of funding towards high hazard forest waste, and materials that are being thinned out and removed and sent to biomass energy facilities in California are now being, that material, it's while it's great for the forest lands, it's now crowding out agricultural waste and urban derived wood that comes out of both out of composting facilities, the woody material, but also from construction and demolition debris processing facilities have lost the capacity of over 1 million tons of material coming out of urban generation. So that inability to have a more comprehensive look has hindered our overall efforts to create local circular economies. We have plenty of market. If we're looking at the agricultural markets now, I would estimate that somewhere between 10 and 15% of the croplands across California are actually utilizing compost. If we got to 50%, we would not have nearly enough compost from our municipal solid waste programs to actually service that need. That has been a growing need. So for the 20+ years I've been doing this, the supply and demand have balanced out over time. So as infrastructure has grown and supply of compost has been developed, it's been able to find a ready market. The challenges in many areas has been noted earlier, they're underdeveloped in many areas, and transportation is and costs associated with transportation certainly are a challenge. That would be an area that would be worthy of some consideration is how do we bridge that gap? So in particular, in Southern California, you have large agricultural cropland areas in Imperial Valley, Coachella Valley. And those farms in many ways are owned by the same folks that farmland in the Central Valley, in Salinas Valley. All of our winter lettuce and winter vegetables come out of, a lot of those come out of Imperial and Coachella. Same growers, Earthbound Farms, Diorigo Farms, Tana Marinal, Dole, Fresh Express. You name the company, they're farming that same land. They use a lot of compost in Salinas Valley, a lot of compost in the Central Valley. They just don't have a supply in Imperial and Coachella that makes it worth applying compost without those transportation costs. So bridging that gap is a significant part of the challenge. The Healthy Soils program through CDFA is a very big part of the solution to getting farmers to adopt these sustainable practices, including compost use. During the last round of Healthy Soils program grants, $66 million went out to 960 projects. Out of those projects, 634 of them, I think, were exclusively compost application. So by percentage wise, you're looking at about $46 million in compost use. I don't even know where that compost is going to come from, because there's, as Cody talked about earlier, by and large, it's difficult to get compost in a lot of areas. And some of those grants, 18 of them or something like that, were given to Imperial County. I'm not sure where the supply comes from. So the market shortage is somewhat of a myth. The markets are there. It's how do you approach them? And in areas where composters have traditionally been operating, they have had no problem moving that material to markets. Talk about procurement, big challenge. The problem that I see, while there are a bit positives, we advocated very strongly for this procurement program. It didn't quite turn out the way we had hoped, but we see having it be a part of a feedback loop to local governments who are in many ways in charge of their own destiny. So they are the ones that contract with their operator, or they operate the programs themselves to collect the materials, develop contracts to process it. They need to walk the talk. They need to be doing everything they can to understand how to implement sustainable landscapes, water efficient landscapes within their jurisdictions. But the way the numbers have been set up by CalRecycle, they may not be able to achieve that. And then in areas where there are market gaps, again, there's not one size fits all, doesn't work. So in places in the Bay Area, 9 Bay Area counties where they've had sustainable composting programs for 2 decades or more, they have no problem selling material. The incremental lift to get additional tons of organic waste composted and sent to market is not that much. In Southern California, where we have no historical capacity, no infrastructure, and a difficult connection to distant markets, it's a different story. So it needs to be focused on the gap between the generation of the jurisdiction and the amount of material that they're actually recovering from the landfill. If that's a small gap, there's no need for procurement. But where that gap is very large, there needs to be some assistance to bridge that until the markets develop, or we figure out infrastructure. Figure out both the infrastructure and the transportation cost factor and how to bridge that gap.
In the interest of time, I think we do need to move on to Mike, but I do want to say that Neil, Edgar, and Evan have been incredibly helpful to the commission so far in our study process, and that we will continue to stay in contact and have the conversations we've been having. Thank you.
Two points, Crystal, and then I'll wrap up. So one is we've been tracking the new franchise agreements that have been established across the state. In roughly 60 jurisdictions, the average cost increase is about 19%. So for me in Elk Grove, where Republic Services provides my service, my cost is going from roughly $30 for my residential bill to $40. So in real cost, these waste and recycling services are wholly undervalued. For me, my economic impact, that means I probably won't be able to buy Paramount Plus streaming service next year. It's, I'll have to take that out of my budget, but it's not $10 a month is not a significant increase. Where you're starting at ground zero and they don't even have organic collection in place, you're talking about much higher cost increases. And then lastly, the facility behind me is a brand new facility that just opened in Yolo County. Most people consider Yolo County a rural county. A lot of agriculture there. This facility took 8.5 years from the time we started developing it till it opened in June of this year. It is a $30 million plus investment. That was the budget, but constructing anything in pandemic times, as the costs have gone up and we haven't completed the facility yet, largely because PG&E has been unable to deliver power to the site that was asked for about 4.5 years ago. Theoretically, that will be delivered by the end of the month. So these facilities can be developed, are developed. This would not happen without having a contract with the County of Sacramento, with the City of Sacramento, and with the jurisdictions in Yolo County to help pave the way towards the operators sticking their neck out. It's a private-public partnership. They took a chance that they would have enough feedstock coming in to help pay the bills here. And within 4 weeks, the facility was full. So sort of build it and they will come has been, it's been a dream come true there, but there's still a lot of challenges to moving this facility, matriculating it, and having it be successful. But there are plenty of good examples like this and solutions that can happen. Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks so much, Neil. Mike, your comments on challenges and recommendations, please.
My name is Mike Mohajer, and good afternoon, the commissioners. By experience, I'm a civil engineer, but however, I've been involved with waste management for the past at least 45 years. Not that I'm that old, but it's been a long time. Now, Commissioner Garcetti asked at the beginning, wanted to know whether any one of us provided testimony before the legislators when the 1363 was being written and the regulation and so on. So I want to just be very short considering the time that yes, I did on behalf of the Los Angeles County, and we have sent during the preparation of the SB 1383, we worked with the author and changed some of the definitions. For example, define organic waste. What are we talking about? Now that was very important, which we put into the legislature. Then when the bill moved into the Cal Recycle, and Cal Recycle will start preparation of the regulation. Going back to 2018, we submitted substantial number of comments. I would say roughly over 150 pages. And I just want to read one of the very short paragraph about one of the letters that we wrote back in 2019. And it reads, the task force is very concerned, this is to Cal Recycle when they were preparing the regulations, not the legislation, regulation. The task force is very concerned about the approaches that the Cal Recycle has selected which places tremendous burden and responsibility on counties and cities, while relying on extremely prescriptive requirement, excessive bean counting and reporting, and requiring counties and cities to impose steep penalties on residents and businesses. We have read about I said, Commissioner Sedley was asking about residents and being concerned about 1383. That's where it comes from. And the only thing that we were successful, because legislation doesn't give the CalRecycle the authority to impose penalty on local businesses and residents. So what CalRecycle did, they imposed it, they made it a mandatory on jurisdiction to adopt an ordinance that imposes the penalty up to $500 a day. And so from a local jurisdiction, especially in Southern California, 1383 has had major impact. I don't want to talk about the infrastructures that we really are significantly short on the needed infrastructures. We have consistently been asking state legislators to provide financial help for building the needed infrastructures. We haven't been that successful. We have been consistently pursuing with the CalRecycle to allow development of alternative technologies for management of the solid waste that we generate. We have been unsuccessful, and CalRecycle has set their mind that you either compost it or you recycle it. And if we can't do either one, we have to go to landfilling. So as far as the changes are concerned, I haven't many of them, but due to the shortage of time, and an example of the bean counting or excessive penalty for not doing characterization of the materials. Dr. Sang, I think he has a presentation that shows what he be talking about and what does CalRecycle require, and why, from technical standpoint, it is a shot in the dark and wasted the taxpayers' money, and ultimately doesn't accomplish anything. So with that said, I'm open to questions here or later on, whenever the commission wish. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Mike. And I will follow up with you on your longer list of recommendations. Commissioner Sidley?
That's all. I was going to ask Mike to share with us his list of recommendations. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kayla, you're up.
Thanks, Crystal, and thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to comment today. It's a really great opportunity. I'm Kayla Robinson on behalf of CR&R Environmental Services, and we're a waste hauler servicing about 3 million people down in SoCal and 25,000 businesses throughout Southern California. We also operate one of the largest anaerobic digesters. I know someone else said they operate the largest, but we are one of the largest down in Southern California. Been operating in Paris, California since about 2016, actually before 1383 passed, and we use our gas from our digester to fuel our fleet. And talking about investments, over the last decade, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars, both private and public dollars, into this infrastructure, whether it's for fueling our fleets, our anaerobic digester, permitting, also injecting into the pipeline. So it's critical for us to talk about markets and markets for RNG in the long term. Chuck and Alex stole a lot of my thunder because we are also a waste hauler and have worked with them very closely to voice these concerns across agencies. So I'll keep my comments fairly short, but I did want to underscore that CR&R shares similar challenges and concerns with disrupting existing markets. And we've been really discouraged that the procurement requirements do not allow us to sell our compost through the existing markets that we built in our region from scratch, and also that our existing compost facility across the border in Yuma, Arizona, cannot process materials and count towards procurement services. So it's been a little bit frustrating for our locals because they feel like we have all the infrastructure, we have everything to help them out, but they are not ready to pay the premiums to actually, cover the cost of compost. And now we're being told we actually need to build a new compost facility in California to be able to help them with procurement on the compost side of things. I'd also like to hammer home some of the comments made about the disconnect between CARB's Advanced Clean Fleet Rule and SB 1383. And we've been engaging with CARB now, I want to say, for 3 years on this regulation. So I know they've heard us, and I want to put on the record that we're truly hopeful that we will be able to find a path forward with them to be able to use our natural gas in our vehicles in the near and midterm. CR&R is supportive of zero emission vehicles and using them in the long term. We understand it's part of carbon neutrality, and we're not expecting to be able to use natural gas in our vehicles. But beyond just the rule, I really want to talk about or urge all of our agencies from CARB, CalRecycle, the Energy Commission, and the Public Utilities Commission to really think about what is the long-term home for renewable natural gas. If, I've heard others talk about, we need 100 facilities in California to actually process what is needed for 1383. And I just feel like right now, RNG does not have a clear home. And so it's not really, I'm not sure why folks would want to invest in RNG at this moment in time if there's not a clear, viable, cost-effective market looking out beyond 2045. And I think CR&R has grappled with this. They're looking to invest further in their anaerobic digestion facility, but they're being told, if you can't put it in your vehicles, where does it go? I've heard hard to electrify sectors, and I think we need to force our agencies across the board, from our energy agencies to our recycling agencies to our utility agencies to think about what is the home for this gas. Because I hear all the buzzwords, hard to electrify, we need to build infrastructure, but I just don't think the markets are there to actually encourage the development of these facilities.
Thank you very much. Gary, your next participant.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, Chair and Commissioners, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Rebecca already introduced us, so in the interest of trying to keep this concise, I'm with True North Renewable Energy. We also are absolutely focused in the state of California to develop, build, and operate large regional facilities that will convert organic material in any form, in any concentration, to renewable natural gas and compost. I've spent many years of my career developing energy from waste infrastructure in Europe and in Asia, and it worked there. And so to really try to keep this on point, why did it work, and why is it maybe not working so well in California? I don't think it's the legislation. Yes, legislation could be improved, and we can always tweak this and that. The procurement requirements are challenging, as has been pointed out, but the legislation is in place. And I think the state should pat itself on the back because it is good legislation. Now we need to execute. And that's what we as private industry are seeing huge potential challenges with being able to execute, because two things are happening. The material is just simply not moving. And number two, commitments aren't being made for long-term solutions for the infrastructure that everyone has said needs to be built. And I think the common denominator to make that happen is there really has to be a sense of urgency. There seems to be a perception, we've heard it from all the agencies, we've heard it from some of the franchise haulers, from jurisdictions that, well, the law's passed, we're starting to move material, we'll get there someday. We know we're behind the 2025 goals, but we'll get there. And you know, in Europe, that didn't work. They hit their goals because they stuck with their timelines. They provided incentives such as subsidies to offset the delta between increased costs, which aren't nearly as expensive as the $40 billion that the overall infrastructure would cost, because private industry will pay for that infrastructure, but jurisdictions might need some help with subsidizing the gap for a few years. And we submitted a letter to Crystal that contains a concise list of market challenges we see, as well as recommendations and an example on how perhaps to subsidize those tip fees to get commitments made would be interesting to you. And so I think this sense of urgency is partly because folks have accepted the fact that the state's not meeting its goals, partially because they don't really think the food waste, for example, is ever going to be diverted because it's hard. And so if I had 1 minute with the governor on what really can be done right now, I think it's to move in two parallel paths. One of them is to address the many obstacles that have been identified by many, right? This is a cultural change to get people to start diverting their food waste. So the education programs, the awareness programs, the support that the governor has already signed to help collection programs be put in place, working through the challenges for the rural areas, perhaps looking at ways to streamline CEQA, because that is also a challenge. But in parallel, I think the sense of urgency to get jurisdictions and franchise waste haulers to make the commitments now for long-term infrastructure. They don't need to invest now. They don't need to increase tip fees now. They don't need to finance. They just need to make commitments to private industry so that we can then go out and complete our development, finance projects, build them, and get them operational by the time volumes start increasing. I think if those two things happen in parallel, the state really does have a chance to meet its targets or get very close to it. We just have to remember that these facilities, new infrastructure, whether it's compost or AD, is going to take 2 to 3 years to build. So now's the time to really urge the jurisdictions, and perhaps with support from the state through incentives and enforcement, to urge commitment now with contracts that allow these facilities to get built, let us do our jobs, and then have them available as the material really does begin moving in concentration. So I think that's the one thing that I think really could be helpful at this point. And I thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Gary. So we are at time. However, Mr. Tung Lee and Mr. Ryan Collins have been waiting patiently. So if everyone would stick around while we let these gentlemen make their comments. Cody, I see your hand up, and I will follow up with you after the meeting. So if it is okay with our chair, we will continue for these last two participants. Mr. Lee, would you like to begin?
Sure, thank you very much. So I'm the executive director of the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association. We're an association of 35 air pollution control officers who are the executive directors of the air districts across California. We are co-regulators with the Air Resources Board in addressing air pollution impacts and public health impacts from air pollution from both the mobile source and transportation sectors through incentives, as well as directly regulating stationary sources of air pollution like composting operations, digesters, and the other infrastructure items that we've been talking about this afternoon. So I will keep my comments brief because I think, the preceding speakers covered a lot of the things that I think we should consider and that I'd ask the commission to take into account as they write up their recommendations. But I want to make a couple of fine points. I think you've heard repeatedly that there needs to be more investment in infrastructure, the significant costs that come along with building this infrastructure, and what are some of the options for the products of organics diversion. If we take a step back and we look at the Air Resources Board's Advanced Clean Cars goals in 2035, their Advanced Clean Fleets goals in 2040, there's a large push towards electrification, and certainly we need to get there someday in order to address all the air pollution challenges that we see in the state. 75% or greater of the air pollution levels that we see in the state are from mobile sources, are from transportation. And so, we feel like there is a significant role here to make some changes from the organic sector, contributing to a lot of solutions that we're facing in the transportation world and as a result of that, the climate world. There is a little bit of a disparity, however, if you take a look at the programs the state is implementing about how we transition to that clean energy future. Because of the large focus on electric vehicles, it seems like interim and transition technologies like renewable natural gas vehicles, like other, zero emission technologies are sort of not being focused on as closely to help us get to that future. And so, what we would recommend is, and again, if the question was asked of me and I had a minute with the governor, and again, this is something that I would ask the commission to really consider, is for the state agencies that are responsible for energy, transportation, climate, to get together and take a look at the different programs, incentive programs, the different programs that you have to encourage the change that is being presented, the challenges that are being presented in 1383 implementation. And is there a holistic way to approach that and make sure that the left hand is talking to the right and that we're providing incentives that capture all of the benefits that we could see in this holistic system? Unfortunately, we've seen a little bit too much siloing in discussions with the energy agencies and some of the air agencies. We participate in many of those discussions and we help try to point that out. But if there's something that the commission could include in its recommendations, I would ask that you please strongly consider a more coordinated approach across all state agencies in how do we get to the goals of, again, this goes outside of just organic waste here, although it does have a large role in this, in what I call the holy trinity of energy, transportation, and climate programs. And so one more thing that I wanted to just kind of comment on and just really quickly, when I was with the Air Resources Board, I've helped Cal Recycle and it helped inform a lot of the things that they were writing into their regulation, participated in the workshops with them, participated in the AB 1045 process, and this is towards the permitting piece of it. Permitting is a challenge. I'll be the first to admit that. And something that we learned through the AB 1045 process is that there's a reason for those permits. Speaking from the air pollution world and from the air district world, the reason why we have those permit requirements is because California already faces significant air quality challenges. We have 2 extreme non-attainment areas in the state. They're the only 2 in the entire nation, and they're here in California, that have those sorts of air quality challenges. And so as we're trying to figure out solutions to our organics waste problem, to our climate problems, and all the challenges that come along with that, we can't lose sight of the existing challenges that our communities already face, air pollution being one of them. And you've heard plenty from my other co-panelists about some of the other challenges that they've seen. So, I'm all for permit efficiencies. Participating in the AB 1045 process was certainly enlightening. But I would just ask folks to, remember that there's a reason for those permits, and it's because there are other things that we need to take into account. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Ryan, you have the last word.
All right, probably not the most important word, given the caliber of our speakers today, but good afternoon regardless. It's a pleasure to join you today. I will do my best to keep my comments to under 3 minutes. My name is Ryan Collins, and I'm with the Tahoe Truckee Sierra Disposal and Eastern Regional Landfill, a waste collection company in Murph, serving the Tahoe Truckee area. I'm involved directly in operations related to waste and am at heart a garbage man with some pretty dirty boots. We represent the rural mountain community and hope that our commentary is of value rather than just garbage. I want to be clear that we fully support the overall mission of methane reduction. However, our team and those of some other rural environments with whom we speak agree that 1383 lacks comprehensiveness in failing to address the challenges of our unique environment. Our mountainous terrain and high altitude environment brings many operational challenges. To name a few: snow and blizzards, freezing trash and food waste, steep terrain, multi-day power outages, low population density, variable material flows, and rural roads that require a multi-component collection strategy. But above all, animal issues, primarily bears, require careful containment and collection of waste. Most of our customers utilize bear sheds, which are lockable metal enclosures located on private driveways. These are manually unlocked and serviced by foot and by hand. This requires a lot of manual labor, and with some routes utilizing up to 3 individuals per truck just to service the trash. This equates to expensive operations, higher proportional emissions per stop, and higher than average costs to add source separated routes like organics. These costs are not comprehensively addressed by the bill, and we still have some collection regions that are not eligible for collection exemptions. While I have more to say on 1383 than time will allow, I wanted to expand on some of the comments already leveled regarding the proximity to composting sites. Transport of compost feedstock and for procurement in rural areas like ours can be very difficult operationally and very expensive. To start, for some routes, our nearest MRF or transfer station is over 100 miles both ways. That's just from collection to transfer station or consolidation site. And worse, the distance between the county MRF we operate to the nearest composting site is a 152-mile round trip. And it's located in Nevada, which apparently does not count toward procurement despite producing a very high-grade compost. We are concerned about the collection and transport emissions outweighing the intended emissions reduction. Not only is this transport challenging to manage operationally and very expensive, but most importantly, our calculations using the EPA WARM model show that it has a negative net effect on emissions. And this is painful to know, especially because we support the overall emissions reduction mission. We suggest that the emissions reductions need to consider the whole picture and life cycle of this important waste stream. Another very expensive issue for rural communities like ours is that the bill fails to provide exemptions for MRFs who operate in and accept waste from exemption eligible collection areas. The only compliance option for a rural MRF accepting mixed waste, which includes organics, in a collection exempted area is to become a high diversion facility, which requires
I'm sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. Can you define MRF for the commission?
Excuse me, a material recovery facility or a recycle sorting facility. Thank you. The only option for a rural MRF in a collection exempted area is to become a high diversion facility, which requires an unrealistic 75% organics diversion rate. This requirement also triggers expensive and complex characterizations, which are large waste studies of MRF organics, to be performed every quarter. For small and low budget facilities like the county MRF, and for small family businesses like us, the cost to run characterizations, which inevitably trigger facility redesign, can be difficult to manage, if not impossible in some environments. This is especially true when MRFs across California are still struggling to make ends meet in the market challenge post-China National Sword era. Our local jurisdictions have dedicated multi-six-figure budgets to complete singular organic studies, multi-six figures, requiring over 15 full-time staff and over 2 weeks to complete. That's just 1 of 4 per year. And the difficulty of these studies cannot be overstated. I spent a good deal of my own time squeezing feces from adult diapers and buried and rotting shrimp for days. And not to mention the difficulty of characterizing organic waste from other similar looking material like dirt or fines in the waste stream, which seems to be an impossible task outside of a laboratory. Thank you again for the opportunity to voice our perspectives on this important topic, and I look forward to following up with the Commission at a later time. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of our participants for participating today. A lot of you have a lot of ideas that we weren't able to get to today, and I will follow up with you, but just thank you for being so generous with your time and your insight with us here today. Mr. Chair, I turn the meeting back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not going to take any more time to thank our participants. I think you did a wonderful job doing that. Let me ask Tamar Foster. I think this is a part of our meeting where we turn to public comment.
Yes, Ashley, if you could put up the instructions for folks. So for those of you who have joined us on Zoom, the easiest way to indicate that you would like to make a public comment is to use the raised hand feature in Zoom. As tradition for our commission meetings, we allow 3 minutes per commenter. And if you have additional comments after that time frame, we just encourage you to follow up with staff. If you have joined us by phone, please immediately send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov and include your name and the phone number from which you've joined the meeting so that we know who to unmute when we are getting to you. So Ashley, are there any individuals right now on Zoom who have requested public comment?
Yes, we have a few individuals requesting public comment. We're going to start with Stephen Jepson. I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Steve Jepson. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works, or SCAP. We represent 80 public water and wastewater facilities in 7 counties of Southern California, serving 20 million people. Climate change is real, as we know, and SB 1383 is an important greenhouse gas reduction initiative. So I have 2 parallel messages here. I'll get started. Our sector worked very closely with Cal Recycle during the development of SB 1383 regulations. At our wastewater treatment facilities, we have anaerobic digesters that can accept food waste and generate a non-fossil fuel renewable biogas. The State Water Board initiated a study to document the capacity of all the wastewater digesters in the state. And it was found that there's existing digester capacity in the state at wastewater treatment plants to potentially accommodate all of the state's food waste. I'll move on to concept 2. As a part of treating society's waste, we generate currently a non-fossil fuel biogas. And if we are to accept food waste, we'll generate more. Our motivation of generating this gas is to provide power and heat for our treatment facilities and as a low carbon vehicle fuel for our fleet vehicles. We're motivated to assist with 1383 to provide a public service and to accept the food waste to generate even more biogas to increase our resiliency. The issue we have now is that the California Air Resources Board Advanced Clean Fleet Rule, as some of our previous speakers have mentioned, especially Kayla, is pushing for full electrification, zero emission vehicles on a very fast track. The market for the types of vehicles that essential public services use is just not there. The vehicles don't have the duty cycles. The other problem with this CARB initiative is that we'll lose that tool for our biogas to fuel our fleet vehicles if we're forced to go electric.
Mr. Jepson, this is Pedro Nava. You're 3 minutes, so you need to wrap up, please.
I will wrap it up. Our request is that CARB and Cal Recycle work together to adjust the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule to allow our sector to continue using non-fossil renewable biogas and help with 1383. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Next, we're going to turn on over to Kelvin. Kelvin Garvain, I'm turning on your ability to talk. Kelvin, it looks like you're still up.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I've purposely followed this commission's 3 hearings. This is very important to me. I'm an intern in Los Angeles at the City of Los Angeles Board of Public Works. For the last 3 years, I've been working directly with food security in relation to increasing access to food and decreasing food waste. Something which I'm seeing that is a niche within the 1383 implementation is Tier 1 food producers donating food to food recovery organizations. A lot of that food is not edible and it is going into garbage cans. And another stream of food going into garbage cans is going into landfills is how consumers, each and every one of us at home, what we buy, what we eat, and what we dispose of. And I think it's very critical to realize that as more people cannot afford food because it is no longer reliably affordable, they're going to rely on food that's donated, and that donated food in many cases is being thrown away. And it can be just as insidious as food that is not actually at the point of production, at the farms, food at the farm that is not actually harvested and put into the value stream. So I think that an approach that can be very important is to think about this niche of donated food under 1383. Many tier 1 food distribution, food generators are donating garbage. They're donating food that is not edible. And the other side of the coin is something I've mentioned in the past, having Assembly Bill 954 that has to do with labeling support what consumers do, because 1383 in the minds of many consumers is at the 30,000 foot level. This is beyond their capacity. It's really affecting the trash bin in their base, in their first floor, you know, in the trash room. But what we do with our food, and then what food that is donated and how it's actually put into the value stream is a niche that I think has to be addressed with 1383. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other additional public comment?
We have no
Mr. Chairman.
requests. Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We have no additional requests for public comment on Zoom or via email.
All right, then hearing that, we'll close the public comment period of our meeting. Let me express my gratitude, as always, to staff for navigating this meeting in such a professional way so that we had absolutely, I don't remember any disruptions. We had a minor echo, but that really wasn't anything having to do with us. Crystal, congratulations on running the meeting. You keep that up, you're going to get them all. And so let me say to my commissioners, thank you for showing up for the roundtable and for participating. I think we've heard from providers, people boots on the ground that are actually confronted with all of the challenges to make this thing work. So thank you to everyone. I'm looking across the board. I see no raised hands, no raised eyebrows, and no expression of a want to make any comments. So with that, we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you. See you next time.